First of all, thank you all for having me. I think this is the second or third time I've been in front of you. How many people have heard me before? All right, I got some new stuff, so hang on. Some of my jokes are the same, but I've got new stuff, and I want to tell you how important this is. I don't have any hobbies. I probably need some hobbies, but I don't have any. I don't play golf. If you ever need to find me and you can't, and you think I'm like every other doctor in the world, I don't play golf. I hate the game. It reveals your character, and I already know I have bad character. So I'm not really, and I don't hunt, I don't fish. I do what we do today. I mean, it's what I do. My one passion in life that I love is college football, though. And I'm a huge University of Tennessee fan, and today is college football Saturday. Yeah, we beat Alabama. We beat them the last 2 out of 3 years. Now, we're not going to talk about the 20 years before that. But it's a big college football Saturday, and so when he told me, when we was going to be here today, I was like, all right, because this is worth it to me. This is above everything else that I do in my life. We're going to talk about the importance of family, community, and relationship, and then how our systems of care are not designed to keep that intact. And they're just not. And it's not a criticism of anybody. And as I'm watching the post-election stuff, and I'm not, I don't want to get too deep into that, but I've never gotten anywhere in my life when I just pointed at other people and said, you're a dumbass. I just haven't ever gotten anywhere like that. And I think that we've got common ground that we can find and start to move forward. And so when some of the things I work in some states that are, extremely over to one side. And I didn't elect people, but I've got to be able to work with them, and I've got to find common ground. And most of the time, if we talk about family, community, relationship, we're able to find common ground. And you can't believe that some of the things that have swung through the years. I've got a unique lobbying style that legislators that I have relationships with that you wouldn't think I would. It's because I help their kids, right? Because what I'm talking about today doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care, if you're from Yale or jail, right? Either one. And so this affects so many people in this room. 75% of us have been affected by addiction in this room. Guarantee it. A friend, family member, coworker, what have you. And our system of care around addiction and behavioral health is not set up like it needs to be. There's a lot of holes in it. It's fragmented care. It's you happen to get the care that wherever you go happens to provide. It may not be what you need. Okay, and then when particularly when we talk about addiction, guys, addiction affects the whole family. It's not just the person who is addicted, right? I mean, it's everybody. You've got moms and dads walking around on eggshells. I don't want to set Junior off. I don't want to do. I mean, that's a hard way to live your life, where you become so hyper vigilant that you're going to trace phone calls and do this and do that. And I mean, it's a sick way to live. It just is. Yet in the treatment process, we don't do anything but focus on that person, and we do nothing to help the entire family unless you have money. And if you have money, it's totally different. So I'm going to go through that with you today and show you what I've found in my experience. I've been in recovery for a little over 20 years. And which still, I hear that number and it freaks me out because I'm still blown away by the first day. In 2004, I remember the first morning I got up, July 8th, 2004, I woke up, and the previous day, I had not used drugs, I had not used alcohol, and to my knowledge, I had not told somebody a barefaced lie to their face. I thought that was impossible. I'm still amazed by that first day, and then I just kept doing that. Now, I'm not going to tell you I hadn't lied. I'm sure I've lied a bunch, not overtly. You can trust me to watch your checkbook, but sometimes I keep things to myself that I shouldn't. But other than that, I've lived my life like this. 20 years have piled up, and as I've watched this for 20 years, I've seen really two systems of care in the United States, and I started seeing it when I was going through detox. So I'm going to show you the stories and show you the people. I want to talk about the Dopesick thing before we get started, though, because it's pretty neat. And I'm sorry, I thought I was going to be able to walk around, so I put my waters down there. So my friend Beth Macy wrote a book back, 7 years ago or so, called Dopesick. Beth is an awesome writer. She already had two New York Times bestsellers before she wrote Dopesick. She's an investigative reporter and journalist from Roanoke, Virginia, Southwest Virginia. And she got really interested in the opioid epidemic and the opioid crisis because of where she lived. Because if you look at the origins of the opioid crisis, which is spread across the United States now, but it really got its foothold in rural Appalachia. I grew up in northeast Tennessee, a little town called Jonesboro. So that is right at the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. I now work in West Virginia. West Virginia is the only state that is entirely encompassed in Appalachia. So it really got its foothold there. And really, a couple of generations of kids have been lost. I mean, if we're honest, in those areas. And so Beth started looking around, hearing the stories, and she's writing her book, Dopesick. She gets to the end of it, and I didn't know her. I was working in Tennessee at the time and in the Department of Mental Health, and my phone rang, and it was her. I don't know how she got my number, and she told me who she was, and she said, I've asked around. There's so much doom and gloom. She said, is there any hope out there? That was her question. Is there any hope out there? And she said, several different people gave me your name. Well, first of all, I was pretty excited about that because I am an optimistic guy. We've lost too many people, but I do think that we're going to come out on the other end. And I think that we'll be better off for it, but too many people will have to die in the process. And so we started talking, and Beth and I became friends. She liked the story I told her that's actually on my hat. And my hat says 70 times 7 on it. And there's probably people in here that know where that comes from and others don't, but it's actually a biblical reference. So I was in northeast Tennessee, and there was a clinic that was a cooperation between our hospital system and our university that wanted to treat people with addiction and use medication and as part of a comprehensive treatment process, which we desperately needed in northeast Tennessee because the nearest clinic was in Asheville, North Carolina, which was over the mountain. And so the people of this community, keep in mind, it's the community I grew up in. I spent my entire childhood and early adult years in this community. They didn't want this clinic in their community. And they put out billboards and signs and all this stuff. We don't want these people here, this, that. And they had a big meeting at the fairgrounds in Gray, Tennessee, which is where I used to go to the fair when I was a kid. And the state sent me up there to answer their questions. And it was a room a little bit smaller than this, but pretty close. And there were about 300 people there. And they were vigilantes. They had the torches out on me. And I was standing up there, and people were just bombarding me with questions. The basic thing is we don't want these people here, these people, whatever that is. I happen to be one of those people, but that's okay. And I was standing there listening to them, and I was trying my best to answer their questions, and it was obvious that they just didn't want it in their backyard. And there was a lady sitting about where you are, and I'm sorry, she was in head-to-toe orange, which is not unusual in the state of Tennessee. And she kept giving me these stink-eye looks the whole time. And finally she stood up and she had her phone up. I didn't know there was something called Facebook Live. I had no idea. But she was putting me on that. And she finally looked at me because I was talking about the need to meet people where they are, right? To love people unconditionally, to demonstrate mercy, to forgive habitually. I mean, that's how I try to live my life, and it's how I guide our practices. If you can't do those three things, you can't work here. I mean, if you want to be mean to people and kick them out and show them tough love, you can go over here and do that. I'm going to do these things here. And that's really the approach I took. And so she stood up and she goes, Dr. Loyd, how many chances does somebody get? Well, I was standing there and I could see 4 church steeples from where I was standing. Now, the mean part of me knew it started off as one church and they couldn't get along, so they split. And now there's 2 churches and they couldn't get along, so now there's 4 churches. That's what I had in my mind, but I didn't say that. Okay, I was smart enough not to say that. As I was standing there listening to her, I remembered my Sunday school teacher. And I asked Jesus the same question. And Jesus says, not 7, not 70, but 70 times 7. Jesus' point wasn't 490. It was how many times does it take? Right, and Beth loved that story, and she actually closed the book Dopesick with it. So if you read the book, that story is actually in there, and it really happened. And I really thought I was in trouble because the head of the hospital and the president of the university were standing behind me as I was answering questions. And that night at midnight, my phone rang, and it was my president of the university. I mean, what president of the university calls you at midnight? I thought, I'm in deep crap. And he said, you did a great job tonight, Steve. But I didn't lose my cool, and I kept the focus on the people I was trying to help. So as we go through this and we have people that are adversaries in whatever way, if we keep our focus on the folks that we're trying to help, we'll be fine. No matter what, I'll guarantee you that's the truth. So Beth calls me up a couple of years later and she says, hey, Steve, she said, they want to make my book into a Hulu series. I thought, damn, that's great, Beth. What's Hulu? And I'm a middle-aged white dude, right? I had no idea what it was. And she said, well, it's like Netflix. And I said, okay, I understand what Netflix is. And so she said, we'd like for you to help us to write it. And you all hear me talk. You think I can write? I have no experience with that. She said, well, you don't have to. We just want you to help us with the scenarios because we're going to rotate our story around a fictional doctor who gets addicted to the drugs that he's prescribing. And at the time, I had no idea who it was going to be, right? And so we met. It was during the pandemic. The writers and producers were all in Hollywood, and Beth was in her home in Roanoke, and I was in my home in Nashville, or just outside of Nashville, Mount Juliet, where I live. And first of all, the writers and producers were all about 14 years old. There were a couple of nights I was like, it's got to be past their bedtime. But they started going through scenarios, and none of them worked, right? That's not how a hospital would work. That's not how this interaction would work. And finally, the producer, Danny Strong, said, hey, Steve, why don't we just use your stories? And I sat there for a second. The first thing that went through my mind is, well, because I'm going to take those to my grave. I mean, that's why. And literally, guys, I thought about it for about 5 seconds, and this is what I came up with, and then it'll lead into my talk. What if you had a disease you never saw anybody get better from? I mean, I think about that as a physician. I'm an internist. I worked in the hospital for 15 years in ICUs and medical step-down units. If somebody had glioblastoma multiforme, it's a brain cancer, they're going to die in 6 months. Never saw anybody live past it. Not my experience. Pancreatic cancer, death sentence. I mean, if you have those two diagnoses and that's all and there's some gray hairs in here and there's some people wearing glasses with bald heads, HIV in the 1980s. Remember that? You get HIV, you're going to die. It's just a fact. And I thought about that and I said, sure. So I started telling them stories. I had no idea. I didn't really know how much money they had. I didn't know who was going to be cast in what. And in all honesty, I forgot that we did it because it was during the pandemic. I was trying to see our patients, in this global, medical emergency, and our patients were marginalized, as you all know, and so it was just a difficult time. So I'd never even thought anything about it. So Beth calls me up in October, a year later, and said, hey, we're having the premiere in Roanoke. Can you come? And I said, I couldn't. I had to have oral surgery, and I'd been waiting on it for like 6 months, and so I couldn't go. And by then, I knew they had cast Keaton to play essentially me. And so, again, forgot about it, came into work the next day, and my son-in-law, who runs all of our social media stuff, he said, hey, Doc, are you in trouble? And some of you know me. Hell, it's possible. And I said, no, why? Not that I know of. Why do you ask? He said, well, your LinkedIn page last night got like 2,500 hits. And I'm thinking, okay. And I didn't think that much about it, and a couple of hours went by, and I got a call from ABC News in New York. And I thought, okay, this is weird. And so it turns out, when I asked the people from ABC, they said, you're the doctor from Dopesick. And so it turns out that after the premiere, they'd asked Beth, was it based on a real doctor? And she said, yes, Tennessee doctor, Steve Loyd. So that's how that came about. I got outed, and I used to not like to talk about it, but I'll tell you why I talk about it now. I talk about it now because of the number of people out there that have seen that and decided it's okay for their friends or family members to get help. And I'll use that all day long. It embarrasses me. Keaton, by the way, it's really good. If you hadn't seen it, I didn't make any money off of it, and I don't get any residuals or royalties, nothing. I was trying to think, best book sold 500,000 copies, which makes it a New York Times bestseller. 23 million people have seen Dopesick. So the reach of it was fantastic. It won 2 Emmys. And we did not win for best docuseries, which is, I guess, the category we were in. Something called The White Lotus won that. I don't know what that is. And then Keaton won for his portrayal of Dr. Samuel Phoenix, which was the character that was my stories. And the bad part about that is he won an Emmy, and I didn't win crap. All right. It doesn't seem fair because I had to live it, but at any rate. But I will tell you one mistake that I made before I get started here. I watched it like everybody else. I had no idea what stories they put in and what they did. And I can tell you, all of them about me, they really happened. There's no Hollywood in there. The only 2 things that didn't happen, I haven't relapsed. We wanted him to relapse because that's the norm. But I had such a great group of people around me. It's been 20 years and I haven't done that. The second thing is, if you watched it, he buys a school bus to take people to treatment. I should have bought a school bus as many people as I've taken to treatment, but I never did that. So those are the 2 things that are not true. The rest of it really happened in my life. So if you haven't watched it, I promise you it's worth your while. It's very well done, and it ends on a message of hope, which I really wanted. So I'm going to talk to you today about a recovery-oriented system of care, and I'm going to show you really disparities. But those of you who've seen me before, hang with me in this first part because I can't talk to any audience until we understand some basics about addiction. And then when we get through that, we're going to look at the system of care, what I really came to talk about. All right, 107,622, does anybody know what that number is? That's right, so the number of overdose deaths in the year 2020. I don't use updated numbers because I'm going to tell you a story in here that's one of the 107,622. And when you see a number like this, one of the things that really bothers me is that when the number gets so big, it just kind of becomes a number, right? It's a statistic. There's a mass murderer out there who I will not honor by saying his name, but I do like his quote. He says, "One death is a tragedy, a million deaths are a statistic." And so I don't want anybody to forget that every one of those 107,622 up there is somebody's mom, dad, brother, sister. There's a story behind that somewhere. And I never want to forget that. And to give you an idea how big that number is equivalent to a 747 airplane, which is the biggest airplane flown in the U.S., fully packed, crashing and burning, killing everybody on board every 36 hours around the clock for a year. Okay? And if that was the case, none of us would go crawl on an airplane to fly home today or tomorrow. That wouldn't happen. So why doesn't this make the front page? Because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in bedrooms. There's several things that mommies shouldn't have to do. CPR on their kid in the bed they grew up in has got to be at the top of that list, and I see that one all the time, right? And so that number is so big. Hotel rooms, underneath bridges, right? They don't come all at once. And then if you have somebody struggling with addiction, you don't want anybody to know. 22-year-old in their obituary died of natural causes. Tell me a natural cause a 22-year-old dies of, right? You don't want anybody to know. And so you're shrouded in this, your family has been ripped apart. You go to church every Sunday, but you hadn't told you'll pray that you sell a piece of property in Sunday school class, but you won't tell anybody in the room that you got a kid struggling with addiction. It's the most unbelievable thing. I love the quotes I read out here. When I came here, the first thing, I walk around, I look at the quotes. Brene Brown's quote out there about vulnerability. Right, that is a great quote. Guys, I had no idea that to be free of the things I need to be free of, all I had to do was open myself up and be seen and be vulnerable. That's it. Now, not just with anybody, but with people that don't want to hurt you. And whenever we do that and we start to share our pain, then we start to come together as a unit. God made us to form this. Right? And if you don't believe me, what do we do for people who get in trouble? What do we do with people we isolate them, we put them in jail. Okay? What do we do with people in jail who get in trouble? We put them in solitary confinement. Guys, we're made for community and relationship. And that's our answer here. And it's what I've got to try to get politicians to see is that how we get out of the crisis that we're currently in is actually community and relationship. And there's a lot of things that will help us get that way. The deal is every system is designed perfectly to get the results that it gets. The system in the United States, no matter what we pump money into, this is our number. I love football. Bill Parcells said we are what our record says we are, and that's our record. So I want to talk about COVID-19 real quick because we're still feeling the effects of that. It really changed the landscape. Everybody has 20/20 hindsight, right? When this thing swept ashore in 2020, the truth is it's a novel virus. None of us have immunity to it. I didn't know what to expect, right? I knew the dangers of it, and I knew when it was respiratory spread, how quickly it could spread. I was worried about that. I was worried about our vulnerable populations. And you have to make decisions sometimes when you don't have all the information. Right, and it's easy for somebody to look back a year later and, well, you should have done this. Well, we didn't have that piece of information at that time, buddy, okay? So I get irritated with people who play armchair quarterback, but I will tell you the one thing that bothered me right off the bat. What we were going to do was we were going to social distance and we were going to isolate and we were going to work from home, which for everybody in this room is probably okay. What if you ain't got no home? What if your kid doesn't have internet for school, right? And for my population, the opposite of addiction is not recovery. The opposite of addiction is community and relationship. I knew it was going to kill my people. I knew it for a fact, and I yelled it as loud as I could. I said, we'll do what we have to do, but if we isolate the people I'm working with, they are going to die at rates that we've never seen before. And that was the first thing that popped up for me. We had increased barriers to treatment. You can't go to your doctor's office for whatever reason, right? You don't want to be around somebody else who may be infected. There were all kinds of increased stigma, pharmacies, emergency departments, hospitals. Basically, they just wanted these people to go away. In Tennessee, we shut down for the month of April. And in Knoxville, which is one of our larger cities, they had all of these people that they had put in hotels who had alcohol use disorder. Well, what happened after they'd been in there for about 48 hours? Hell, they started to go through withdrawals. And they called me up and they said, Steve, what are we going to do? And I said, we're going to the liquor store, okay? Which is what we did. And I lobbied really hard for our governor to keep open package stores and liquor stores, and people were all over him for doing that. He was exactly right, guys, because if you close that down and this population doesn't have access to it, they're going to flood your emergency department in DTs. You just had to do what you had to do. Our overdose rates increased by more than 30%. And guys, I've re-looked at those numbers. In the South, where I live, the numbers were up over 100%, and they were high to start with. And then alcohol-related deaths increased by 25%. I can't tell you how many phone calls I got during the pandemic from families of my son's friends, whose parents were now working for home and they realized they had a drinking problem, right? It was just amazing to me. And so COVID-19 really changed our landscape. It really changed the mindset. And for me, it helped me push the message forward because now we've got proof, right? If you don't believe what I'm saying, we actually did this. We isolated people, and this is exactly what we saw. So let's talk about addiction real quick. So I got to teach you what it is, and I'm not going to teach you like, some PhD biochemist somewhere, all right? I'm going to use a slot machine. And I do this same talk if I'm in Vanderbilt University's medical school or if I'm in the Rutherford County Jail, because I can't understand psychobabble, but I get a slot machine. A slot machine is when the 3 sevens come down on the pay line. That's when the money comes out the bottom, okay? So addiction is the biopsychosocial model. A lot of you in the room know what that is. I used the slot machine and said, it's genetics, trauma, and opportunity. That is addiction, okay? The first 7 is the biology part of addiction. You got to remember, addiction is about 60% inherited, okay? Not 100%, but about 60%. If you have somebody struggling with addiction, look in their family tree. I'll guarantee you're going to find addiction in there. If you want to know if somebody is at increased risk for addiction, look at their family history. 60% of it is genetic. The second 7 is the psycho part of the biopsychosocial model. That's what kind of household were you raised in? And nobody in this room came out of a normal household. They don't exist, okay? But some of us came out of places worse than others. Physical, sexual, emotional abuse, big T traumas. Something called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. I'm going to talk about it here in a second. I think it's the second most important study done in the history of medicine, only behind hand washing. And we learned absolutely nothing about it in med school and residency. I had never heard of ACEs until I struggled with my own addiction. I'd never heard of the role of trauma in mental health and substance use issues, never. Guys, this is the #1 health problem in the United States I'm talking about to you today, #1. And if you don't believe me, say, oh, Dr. Loyd, cancer, heart disease. Nope. How many people die every year of nicotine addiction? Smoking is the #1 preventable cause of death in the entire world. This is the biggest health problem in the entire United States, yet we learn nothing about it in medical school or residency. And so I go to medical schools and residency and say, how come we're not teaching this? Dr. Loyd, we don't have room for it in our curriculum. It's the #1 problem. Well, to give you an example, we had an hour in biochemistry class in med school on maple syrup urine disease. Anybody ever heard of it? Maybe a couple. And I'm not knocking the people with maple syrup urine disease. I'm not discriminating here, all right? But my point is that maple syrup urine disease is this big, all right? Addiction is this big. And yet we learn nothing on it. Why do we learn about maple syrup urine disease? Because there's a question on the national boards on it. And so what I'm fighting for right now is to get questions on addiction on the national boards, because I think it's the only way we're going to do it. So we get back to the psycho part is physical, sexual, emotional abuse. And then the third 7 is just the social opportunity. What's widely available and socially acceptable? What's the most widely available, socially acceptable thing people have trouble with? Easy. Alcohol. We can buy it in this hotel, right, at the mini mart up here. And I'm not saying we need to get rid of alcohol. So what happened with opioids is we've known that opioids have been dangerous and addictive since the time of Hippocrates, really for 2,000 years. Yet in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the pharmaceutical industry, in a push to increase the market for opioids, said that they're way safer than we originally thought they are, and we're hurting people by not treating them with opioid pain medication. If you had a long-acting drug rather than a short-acting drug, it has less chance of addiction. Keep in mind, there's no science behind any of that. The FDA, who's supposed to protect everybody in this room from marketing, from companies, signed off on that, and it said it may be less addictive in the package insert that the FDA says. Well, that's not a big word, guys. That's a huge word when you're marketing. And so the pharmaceutical industry, mainly Purdue Pharma, goes out to rural areas, which they targeted in Appalachia. And I told you doctors don't learn anything about this in medical school. If they don't learn anything about it in medical school, who taught them? Pharmaceutical industry. And now you unleash an incredibly addictive medication called oxycodone in the form of OxyContin on a genetically predisposed and traumatized population, and voila, here we are. All right. And I'm not a huge statistic guy, but this one is one that's sobering. If we keep on our current rate, and it's going down, by the way, our overdose rate is going down. West Virginia, where I work right now, was down 34% month over month from last year, so we are making progress. But that's a good thing. All right. To get to where we were pre-1994, if we do everything like we need to according to computer modeling, it'll take to the year 2048, okay? It's gonna take a while. We're going down, that's good. My fear is as soon as it goes down, people stop paying attention to it, and I don't want that to happen. But if we keep on our current rate, when we get to April of 2025, we'll have lost more Americans to the opioid crisis than we've lost in every war that we've ever fought in combined. And that includes the War from Independence and our Civil War, where everybody who died was an American. So that ought to, rattle the cage a little bit. So addiction is genetics, trauma, and opportunity. So I love to talk about the brain stuff here real quick. There's a bunch of people in the room that have kids in here, and I'm going to teach you why your teenagers are stupid, okay? Your teenagers aren't stupid, they make bad decisions, right? Just like we all made bad decisions when we were teenagers. There's actually a reason for it, and it has to do with addiction. So 2 areas of the brain I want to talk about. Do I have a laser pointer on here? I don't know, do I? Okay, I can't figure it out. You just got to go with me. If we imagine where my 2 fingers meet, I turn this way, we cut me this way. We're looking in the right hemisphere of our brain. An area about the size of my fist right in the middle of our brain is our go system. Okay, it has a bunch of names. All of them are Latin. I hate all of them. We don't need to know that. We just need to call it go. Everything in front of that fissure that's going up that way in the front part of the brain, on this side, that's our frontal lobe. We're going to call it stop. So really our brain is go and stop, okay? The go part of our brain is all about pleasure, food, water, sex, okay? That's it. Because the go part of our brain has 2 big responsibilities. One responsibility is that it's responsible for our will and our desire to live. What would you do to save your own life in here right now? You all are capable of anything. You don't think you are, but you are. If I cut this room off from all food and water, we sit here and looked at each other day after day, we're going to do a couple of things. One thing we're going to do is we're going to drink each other's urine. It's going to happen. Okay, promise. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to eyeball each other. And the weakest one gets eaten first. That's exactly what's going to happen. All right? And that, guys, is a function of our go system of our brain. Here's what happens in addiction. That goal of life is replaced by whatever the substance is. And the real kicker with that is the craving for that substance is 10 times stronger than your cravings are for food when you're hungry and water when you're thirsty. So the next time you look at somebody with addiction and go, why don't you just put it down? Just quit. I want you to remember that, because it would be like you putting down food and water and just quitting, only it's 10 times harder. Not saying it's impossible, but that's really what we're up against. So that's the first function of the go system. The second function of the go system, it's responsible for our species going forward in time. What does our species have to do to go forward in time? Number 1, got to live to be reproductive age. Number 2, got to have sex. If we do that over a big enough population, our species will continue. The things that lead us to be reproductive age, do they feel good? Eating and drinking. I watched all of you all relapse out there this morning, right when I got here. All right, I saw you circling, I saw a big thing of eggs, you're digging in like that, right? So you hadn't eaten, it's the longest fast of the day, it's during the night. You come down here, your blood sugar's a little low, you got a little sweat on your arm, right? You've got a cue telling you it's time to eat, right? It's early morning, and you've got a dadgum buffet out there. And then if I want to drive your cravings up even more, I'll raise the hood on that thing and let the fumes blow in your face. That'll increase your cravings even more. Next thing you know, you're all out there circling. You bring it in here. Your brain has euphoric recall. It remembers the last time you felt like this, you ate, you felt better. That's called euphoric recall. You do it automatically now. And when you take a few bites, here's what happens in your reward system. Your reward system makes its own morphine, its own heroin, its own codeine. They're called endorphins and enkephalins. And those endorphins and enkephalins attach to the opioid receptors, same receptors that heroin attaches to, and leads to the downstream release of dopamine, and that's why some of you are sleepy right now. It's not because I'm boring, okay? You're fat, happy, and satisfied. That's fine, right? And then that dopamine is taken back up into the nerve ending, waiting on the next thing to come along and cause its release. Dopamine is our feel-good hormone. When you fall in love, you love spending time with a significant other. You go watch your kid play in an athletic event, school play, band. That feeling you get is dopamine, guys. A mom looking at a baby that's just been born in the warmer. You remember that feeling? That's dopamine, right? It brings us together in community, right? And so that's what happens. If every time you ate or drank, you threw your toenails up, heck, you'd stop eating and drinking. Does sex feel good? Yes. If it didn't, nobody would do it, okay? So eating, drinking, and sex, all good things. Everybody agree, right? Can you think of an instance where they may not be a good thing? Don't worry, I'm not stupid enough to go down the sex route here. All right, anybody ever tried to lose weight? All right, tried to lose weight really hard. Up until about 10 years ago, I weighed a little over 250. I tried every diet known to man, all carbs, all meat, no meat. I was a vegetarian one afternoon for almost 20 minutes, about how long I could make it. I lost weight with every one of them, and every one of them I put the weight back on. And so 10 years ago, I decided I'm going to do this. I'm going to watch what I eat, and I'm going to exercise. And I try not to eat anything that comes out of a bag or a box. That's about how specific I am. That's it. And then I exercise every day. I work at a little gym called Orange Theory because they're everywhere, and there's several here in Orlando. So I was there this morning. I had to Uber, but I was there. All right. So I burn about 800 calories in an hour, 6:15 in the morning. On my way home, I pass a damn Krispy Kreme donut. I love Krispy Kreme. Even talking about it, I get this visual image of the donut, and now they're selling the things at McDonald's. I'm like, come on, man. The next thing I know, they'll put meat in between it, and it'll be a Krispy Kreme sandwich. I'm starting to dream now. So I love Krispy Kreme. So when I drive by the Krispy Kreme donut on my way home after working out for an hour, what's the reward system of my brain telling me? It's all food, water, sex, right? Pull in there. I have a fully functioning frontal lobe. I have a fully functioning stop system of my brain. The stop system of our brain gives us insight, judgment, and empathy. Those three things. These two things work in concert. Guys, you all make decisions every single day that are these two systems. You look at a series of choices that have outcomes, and you pick the choice that gives you the most amount of pleasure with the least amount of consequence. And you do it all day long. Okay, all day long. This is how this works. So I'm going to drive by the Krispy Kreme. I smell it, right? My cravings go up. They know what I know, right? Or they know what the brain does. They know if they can overcome my thinking part of my brain and get to the lizard part of my brain, I'm likely to pull in Krispy Kreme. Now, the thinking part of my brain says, hang on a second, Steve. Your goals are to lose weight and get in better shape, okay? And each one of those Krispy Kreme donuts is 220 calories and 20 grams of fat. I'm sorry, guys, that's actually true. Not going to be much of a problem. I'm going to eat 4. That's 880 calories, 80 grams of fat. What happened to my workout? You all laugh at this, but you know it's the deal, right? It is the deal. And so I'm going to drive by there. I'm not going to pull in. Krispy Kreme has one last line of defense. What is it? That freaking hot donuts now sign. So now they're attacking me with my nose and my eyeballs, and then I'm sitting in there ordering, I'm getting the whole milk, none of the 2% crap. I mean, that's how that works, right? And so, but I've got a fully functioning frontal lobe, and now I can drive by there because I can get to my goal because these two areas of my brain are working together, and they're fully developed and they're connected. Now, here's the deal. These two areas of our brain, the connections are not complete until we're 23 years older for a woman and 25 years older for a man. Look in your own lives. Did you make better decisions at 16 or 30? All right. Did you make better decisions at 16 or 40? Right? And so as we get older and we mature, these connections happen and we become more insightful and we learn from our past actions and see what the consequences are. So our brain is really a predictor of the future. That's how it works. We have this series, I'm going to do this. The last time I did this, this was the outcome, and then I get to choose whether or not to do it. That's how those two areas of our brain work together. You said, Steve, it's all well and good. What's it got to do with my teenagers? It's why your teenagers are stupid. Okay, they're not stupid. They're driven solely by their reward system, and they don't have a fully functioning connected frontal lobe. Those of you who have teenagers that drive, how do you feel when they leave the house without you? Right? You lay awake at night with your ears open and your eyes open until that front door opens and you know they're safe for another night. Why is that? Because you know they can die and they don't. It's as simple as that. Then when they get to be 23 and 25, if you don't believe what I'm saying, their car insurance rates go down. The insurance companies know what I'm talking about. Okay, so hang in there with your kids, and when they get to be 23 and 25, you can start talking to them again. They make more sense. All right. What's that have to do with addiction? These two areas of our brain, the connections between them, are arrested in development at time of first drug use. Linda's 35 years old. She comes to me, she's shooting heroin. I'm doing an intake on her, and I'm getting madder by the second at her answers, and everybody in the room who works in this field has done this at some point. First of all, stop getting mad at them. It doesn't work. I don't do things that don't work. And when I feel myself doing that, I stop myself and say, Linda, how old were you when you started using? Dr. Loyd, I was 14. From a brain standpoint, I'm not dealing with a 35-year-old, I'm dealing with a 14-year-old, and I know how to deal with 14-year-olds, and I'm going to show you this here in just a second, okay? We have to remember that. We have to remember the brain age of somebody that we're dealing with, because they're driven solely by their reward center, and they do not have insight, judgment, and empathy. I'm always amazed in the addiction field when the people who are working in the field like I do, they're surprised when somebody with addiction uses drugs. That's what people with addiction do. They use drugs. They're going to have slips if we don't help them. If we don't help them identify the underlying drivers, which are trauma and untreated behavioral health issues, they are going to use. It happens. All right, so stop getting mad at them. Understand a little bit about what you're dealing with. Because I watch people all the time that are treated as if this is some kind of moral failure. And there's nothing wrong with going to church, and there's nothing wrong with helping little old ladies across the street. It ain't got anything to do with addiction, guys. It just doesn't. You know, I hear people say, you need to pray about it. God will heal you. I believe that. I also believe that God put orthopedic surgeons on the earth to fix broken legs too. I've never seen God in a burning bush or been up on a mountain and had anything chiseled. That has never happened to me. I see God in other people. It's one of the things I like about coming here, because I watch you all. And the last time I came, I got here early and I hung out in the eating places and talked to people. They had no idea who I am, and I watched how they take care of their families and at the level that they're willing to go to take care of their children. To me, that's God. That's what I see, and I see that in addiction as well. It's not just about waiting on God to heal you. So if I look at PET scans of brains, if you don't believe what I'm saying, don't get intimidated by PET scans. All PET scans do is look and see where radio-labeled sugar goes. That's it. So if I want to know your cells in your body that are functioning, all I got to do is attach a radio label to a sugar molecule, ram it in you, light you up. I can see what cells are functioning. That top row of brains are normal brains, okay? Across the board, normal. Uptake all throughout all lobes. Second row of brains have been detoxed off of drugs for 10 days. I bring Linda in, she's shooting heroin. Detox her for 10 days. All right, Linda, you're ready to go. I send her back out into the world, and that's her brain. What do you see in the frontal lobe? Nothing. What is functioning with Linda? Her reward system. How long does it take Linda to stick a needle in her arm after she overdoses? Same day. Why? Because we didn't do anything to treat the underlying disorder. And if you go back to the brain stuff, she thinks she'll die if she doesn't have this, and she doesn't have insight, judgment, and empathy. Guys, it is absolutely predictable that the person that overdoses and leaves the hospital is going to use that day. It just is, and we need to accept that reality, and now we need to intervene on it to save their life. Look at the bottom row of brains. Brains have been detoxed off of drugs for 100 days. I got to stay in treatment for 3.5 months. By the time I walked out of treatment back into my job, which I did not lose, I got paid the whole time I was gone, I already had my frontal lobe starting to come back online, and I had this support network around me to help me be successful in my career. Why did I have all that? Because I cost too much money to make. The taxpayers of the state of Tennessee paid for my education. I'm a doctor. It cost a lot to educate me. It is easier to rehabilitate me and put me back in my job than it is to make a new me. That's a fact. When we intervened on nurses, what do we do to them in the hospital? Fire them on the spot. Why? because we got a whole nursing school full of them and they're cheap. What about if you don't have a job and you're working, or you're working in a convenience mart and they catch you? Fire them on the spot. Nothing to do with what their families are. A lot of people struggling to get by. You go in, they're struggling with substances. We figure it out, and they've had low productivity. Instead of going in, hey, how can I help you? Can you tell me where I can meet you at here? We want to make sure that you're successful. We fire them on the spot. And then they've got 2 kids at home. They ain't got any idea in hell how to feed. And we do this all the time. And it is really hard to watch because we have 2 systems of care that I'm going to get into. How long does it take to go from the bottom row of brains to the top row of brains? Anybody know? 2 years. It takes 2 years. Why do I love medications to treat opioid use disorder? Because medications quell cravings. Cravings are why people relapse. It's why you all are going to relapse here in a few hours at lunchtime. Okay? Same thing. So if I can quell your cravings, I can hold you in the treatment process longer, and we can get to those underlying drivers of behavioral health and trauma. That's why I love medication. If everybody had the treatment that Steve Loyd got, we wouldn't need medication for very many people, but it ain't going to happen. It costs too much money, too much effort, and people aren't going to do it, right? They're not going to have the resources. Medication is actually a way to keep the cravings at bay so that we can treat them over the long term and have better success rates. You all probably don't recognize this guy. His name is Vincent Felitti. He's the lead author of the ACEs study. He treated morbidly obese women in California in the 1980s. They would lose weight. Some of them would put it back on, others wouldn't. He was interested in what the difference between the 2 cohorts were, and he thought it had something to do with trauma. He came up with a list of 10 questions, which we now know as the ACEs questionnaire, Adverse Childhood Experiences. There was one question that got his attention, and it was this: how much did you weigh the first time you had sex? And the answer he got was in the 40 to 50 pound range. He realized he'd asked the wrong question. What question should he have asked? How old were you the first time you had sex? All of these women were victims of sexual abuse in their own families, most of the time by their own fathers. What was the women's drug of choice? Food. And this is the other mistake we made with substances, guys. The problem is not the substance. The substance is the solution. These women thought if they could eat enough, they could make themselves physically unattractive to their perpetrator. So I want to stop right now, and I want to go back to Steve Loyd. His last year of residency. Med school's 4 years, residency's 3 years. I was in the 7th year of that process. I didn't like my wife very much. I'm still married to Karen, by the way. Problem wasn't her. Problem was me. My kids weren't very well behaved. I was nervous about getting out of residency. I had anxiety, depression, all these things going on in my life. I pulled up to a red light in Johnson City, Tennessee, flipped the glove compartment of my truck open after work one day, and I had some old Norcos in there, hydrocodone, acetaminophen. Y'all know them as Vicodin. My dentist had given them to me. I didn't think anything about them, slung the glove compartment of my truck. I took one out, broke it in half, threw it in my mouth. I thought, my patients take these things all the time. I'd never used one. And then I set off home, 10-minute drive. By the time I got home, suddenly my wife was better. I liked her better. My kids were better behaved, and work wasn't as hard. That's a heck of a 10-minute drive home. What happened on that 10-minute drive home? Guys, this is what I didn't know. The area of our brain that processes pain. So if I smack Lynn in the toe with a sledgehammer, she's not going to feel it if their brain doesn't interpret it. If I could sever a connection there, she won't feel it even if I hit her on the toe with a sledgehammer. So the part of our brain that senses and processes physical pain does not separate physical from emotional pain. Think about that for a second, because what you all don't know is my first and second 7. So my first 7 is genetics. There are 18 first cousins on my pay line, the Loyds and the Shipleys, 2 gene pools that should have never mixed, okay? Promise you. 18 of us on this line. 14 of us have substance use issues. I got my eye on the other 4, by the way. And 4 of us died of drug or alcohol overdose before age 40. My first 7 is on the pay line. Second 7, trauma. I grew up with an abusive mom. My mom, she's a very good grandmother, but back in the day, she was a tyrant. She was physically abusive, and I'm not talking spankings. I'm talking beatings. Belts, belt buckles, baseball bats, tobacco sticks, ends of shotguns and rifles. The worst thing me and my sister were ever hit with, and I think Becky would tell you the same thing, the old Aunt Jemima syrup bottles. You could drop them from this high on a concrete floor and they wouldn't break. That's how thick they were. We have been hit with everything you can think of. Between ages 4 and 5, my earliest memory, I started to be molested by my uncle. And it got worse as I got older until I got old enough to defend myself. So I'm sitting there at this red light with this emotional pain that I had been dragging with me absolutely forever. If you doubt anything I'm saying, read a book called The Body Keeps the Score. It's outstanding. And be careful, you've got a trauma history, it's triggering. It'll explain all of this because I didn't know. And guys, I had stuck everything in the world I could think of on my wall to try to make it better. I was the first one in my family to ever graduate college, and I went on to medical school. And it all worked for about that long. And then I had that same uncomfortable feeling. When I threw that pill in my mouth that day, it was the first time in my adult life that I felt okay. I didn't feel high, I didn't feel buzzed. I felt like I was comfortable in my own skin. Guys, I slept underneath my bed until I was 17 years old. The only time I didn't sleep underneath my bed is when I had friends over to stay all night. The rest of the time I slept underneath my bed because night time's when bad stuff happened. Never told anybody that, went about my life, and here I am. I got MD on the wall, I'm a chief resident, and I'm dealing with all this, and all of a sudden that pill hits my mouth and I'm okay. How many times does this happen? Because what I was really doing was self-medicating, right? And so I went from that half of a 5 milligram hydrocodone that day to within 3 years, I was using 500 milligrams of OxyContin and 8 milligrams of Xanax every day. How much is 500 milligrams of OxyContin? That's 100 Vicodin. 100, not 100 milligrams, 100 pills every day. And I wasn't living underneath the bridge. I was working in the hospital taking care of your friends and family members in the ICU, medical step-down units, and I was a professor at our medical school. I had no idea that my underlying trauma history put me at increased risk to where this little pill was going to rule my life. There are people sitting in the audience right now that I always get scared I trigger, and I did it yesterday. Okay, if I did, please talk to somebody because you start sitting there and realizes this is you. It's okay, because there's great help out there. Now, here's the problem with the great help. I did not get help with the underlying sexual trauma until I'd been in recovery for 10 years because I wasn't going to talk about the sexual trauma. That wasn't going to happen. Okay, well, I'm a dude. There's no way I'm going to talk about that. I had been clean. I had no drugs, no alcohol in my system. My daughter got married. My son graduated college, and I started having PTSD symptoms. I was nearly 50 years old, and I'd never had them. And I didn't do anything about them, and I wound up on the edge of my bed looking down the wrong end of a 45, right up against my temple with the hammer back. And that's a bad place to be. And guys, I was stone cold sober. I didn't address the underlying sexual trauma. I figured I could just get through it, and it nearly took my life. Luckily thing for me is I got to go to a place called Onsite. I sent myself, I looked them up, researched them, took myself there. They're the #1 place in the world dealing with trauma, physical and sexual trauma. And addiction treatment saved my life. Trauma treatment changed my life forever. How much did that cost? Anybody know? I was there 4 weeks, self-admitted 4 weeks, and I would have stayed longer if they'd let me. Anybody know? 50 grand. It's $50,000 cash. I treat drug-dependent pregnant women. Why do I hate knowing that treatment exists? Because they'll never get it. They'll never have a shot at it. We'll treat them with medication. We'll push them through the system. We'll hope they turn out okay. A lot of them will die. A lot of them will go back to abusive relationships because they think that's the best they can do. And we'll go about our business and wondering why we're spending so much money on TANF and everything else in the book. We're already spending the money, guys, to treat these folks. We're just spending it in corrections and food stamps and welfare. We need to spend it on helping them on the underlying, because nobody wants to live like that. And nobody wants to get up and stick a needle in their arm, I promise you that. I'm sorry to digress there a little bit, but this is really, really important stuff. And I want you to understand, I wasn't immune to it. I had tried everything in the world to feel comfortable in my own skin. People say, Steve, I don't see why you use drugs. They don't work. You didn't use the right ones. They work. I promise you, right up until they stopped working. So you saw how quickly that was. It nearly took my life. As I sat there that day with a gun up beside my head, I remembered two things. The first thing was I was scared of who was going to find me. I don't know if that's normal or not, but I got scared of that. And the other thing I remember from addiction treatment was ask for help. And so I put down the gun and I asked for help, and literally, it made my life what it is today. If we look at people who are trauma, they're 15 times more likely to commit suicide. They're 4 times more likely to have a sexually transmitted disease, about 4 times more likely to develop a drinking problem. Their rates of absenteeism from work are elevated. And when I tell you the ACEs study is the most important study done in the history of medicine, this is the reason. When your ACEs score gets to 4 or above, your risk of everything goes almost straight up. And by everything, I mean real diseases like diabetes, hypertension, cancer, right? Behavioral health issues, substance use disorder. Yet a lot of people have never even heard of ACEs and don't understand the importance of underlying trauma. I'm telling you this, until we start to address trauma and untreated behavioral health issues, we will make no progress at all in substance abuse. And I don't care if we kill every cartel in the world, it won't matter. There'll be something else come along. And I'm not telling you we don't need interdiction efforts, we do. We need drugs to stop coming into our country. It will not fix this. What will fix it? Treating the underlying drivers and prevention in our schools. And then we'll start moving in the right direction. Third 7 is widely available and socially acceptable. The pharmaceutical industry cited studies in the New England Journal of Medicine that showed that opioids were less than 1% addictive. This is the study. And first thing you notice, it's not a study at all. It's a letter to the editor. It's written in 1980. Purdue Pharma started using this in about 1993. The doctor who wrote this letter, Herschel Jick in Massachusetts, didn't even know they were using it. And Dr. Jick and his then graduate student, Jane Porter, said we had about 40,000 people in our hospital. While they were here, about 12,000 of them got an opioid. We followed them after they left. Only 2 of them became addicted. Guys, that's not even comparing apples to apples. Hospital stays are short. Outpatient treatment with opioids is long. And this is what Purdue Pharma used to market the drug OxyContin, and it's why they're bankrupt, and it's why I hope all of them rot in hell. I'll have to deal with that one on my own. I realize there's some resentment there. 100 words. I can't think of another 100 words that have killed more people in the United States than these 100 in the way that Purdue Pharma used it. So our treatment options: outpatient, detox, inpatient, and partial hospitalization. Partial hospitalization and inpatient. So the reason I throw that up here is, how do you navigate that system? I mean, if you have somebody struggling with this, how do you know which one, right? And because the doctors and the people out there who are supposedly trained in medicine don't understand this system, and the people who do understand it a lot of times are biased and think the only way to get better is the way that they got better. And so we get families all the time that are stuck in the middle and they don't know which side to listen to. You've got these groups over here saying, hey, you need to ostracize your kid, show them tough love, kick them out of your house, right? And don't feed them, let them find their bottom. And guys, that's all horse crap. Okay, and I'll give you an example there. Alcohol is still the toughest thing I deal with. It's still the toughest, okay? But I'm 57 years old. I'm healthy, I don't take medicine, I don't have any diseases. If I start drinking today, and I can, I'm going to the airport later today. Heck, I can sit at the bar and get drunk if I want to. I got an ID and I got money, okay? It'll take me 20 years of hard drinking to kill myself if I don't have a car wreck. If I decide to relapse on opioids today and I stop down here on the corner and I already got a pretty good idea where I can find stuff just from walking around last night, and I get a hold of the wrong pill, I'm dead today. I'll be dead this afternoon. We cannot think about addiction like we have for the last 100 years. It is an emergency now. One pill will kill you. You don't even have to be a user. You just got to get a hold of the wrong one, and I'm going to show you here in a second. And then our system is so convoluted, we don't know how to maneuver through it. People don't understand how to maneuver through it. Families get caught in the middle, and when you have somebody in your family who is using or who has an untreated behavioral health disorder, it affects the entire family. The kids that don't have it are resentful because the other kid is getting so much attention. Now they're at risk. Okay, I've seen husbands and wives just literally get torn apart and lose their marriage over this. When families call me and say, Steve, what can I do to help my son or daughter? My answer is always the same, and I get cussed like a dog every time. The thing you can do most is get help yourself. That's what I tell all of them right off the bat. Dr. Loyd, I have no idea what you're talking about. If my son or daughter would just do this, everything would be okay. I said, I'm going to have that painted on the back of my wall, because it's not true. It's not true. We have to be healthy ourselves if we have any hope at all of helping our kid. It's why I love Brene Brown so much. She gets this better than about anybody I've ever seen or talked to. So we hear about standalone detox. What we need to do is we need to get you off the drugs so you won't be sick. Guys, people don't relapse because of being dope sick. They relapse because of cravings. Just like that's why I use food as your example. Okay, we have to quell cravings or people are going to relapse. Standalone detox just gets the drug out of somebody's system. It's a waste of time and money. Movement from detox to higher levels of care, who knows how that works? Only about 8% of the people who get detox get to go to a higher level of care. 61% of detox admissions are a repeat of another detox admission. So one begats another, begats another, begats another. If you all know anybody in this room that's suffering from addiction, they've lived this. You detox them, you put them out, they use right after they get out because of what I just taught you. and you didn't do anything to treat them long-term as a chronic disease that it is. And patients exiting detox have the highest risk of overdose. Why? Because they lose their tolerance. Every time you take an opioid from the outside, you build more opioid receptors, so you need more dope to fill up those opioid receptors. Whole time dopamine receptors are going down. Dopamine's what makes you feel good. So these are going up, you need more of it. These are going down, you feel less. More and more for less and less effect. That's tolerance. And it's exactly what happens. Only 8% of detox admissions get to a higher level of care. And the take-home message is, rather than functioning as a first step to inpatient care, inpatient detox might be more effective as a way to stabilize somebody and find out the level of care they need. And I believe that, and it's what I advocate for. Self-triage, they say, is insanity, and I always laugh at that. What do you mean you're going to let the patient decide what their treatment is? Hey, this is a news flash to doctors everywhere. I love doing this one. Patient decides anyway. I don't care if you're talking about treating hypertension, diabetes, I don't give one rat's rear end. Patient decides anyway. How many diabetic patients in my career, and I've taken care of thousands of diabetics, followed their diet and exercise regimen? I had one, Mike Shepard. I love Mike. I had one, and Mike died early, okay, from something else. I'd get people in the hospital with blood sugars through the roof. I'd put them on a 2,000 calorie diet, which they were supposed to be in on the outside. And if I kept giving them the same medicine they were getting outside, their blood sugar got too low. And I couldn't figure out why until I came back in the room the next day and their blood sugar was normal. And I looked over in the window of the room and there's such a bunch of Mountain Dew Code Reds. Patients are going to do what they want to anyway, guys. They self-triage. If I'm looking for a level of care, I've got to pick the level of care that my patient will do. That's what I've got to figure out, and people think that's heresy. Medication-assisted treatment is absolutely the standard of care. Naltrexone, buprenorphine, methadone, they all three save lives. Stigma is the biggest obstacle. Oh, you're switching one drug for another. Guys, if you were switching one drug for another, we'd have a 100% retention rate. You know what our retention rate is using medication? About 50% at 6 months, about 33% at a year. Has nothing to do with switching one drug for another. What are the obstacles? Stigma. Treatment centers, doctors, pharmacists, hospital staff. If any of you all have ever had somebody with a behavioral health disorder or an addiction disorder and you take them into the hospital, how'd you get treated in the emergency department once they found out you had one of them two things? You know how you were treated. You were treated as second class. You were treated as, oh, this is this person here. You're pushed over to the side. All of a sudden, all the empathy that healthcare providers have, they go out the door when they figure out you got a substance use disorder or a behavioral health disorder, and they'll just literally kick you out of the hospital or put your name on the wall. What's the role of telehealth? I love telehealth, but it doesn't separate this. I think, is Michelle in here somewhere? Michelle, one of the things I did for NFF a few years ago, we did on the computer. And I thought it was okay. This is much better. There's nothing that replaces this. All right? And I love telehealth because of the things I'm going to show you. It doesn't replace this. And so what I see right now is moving a bunch of this to telehealth, and that's okay if we're trying to reach a rural area. It's not okay if we're just trying to avoid this, because we get better in relationship and community. Biggest game changer we've had in the treatment of opioid use disorder in the last 20 years. It increases access in real time, because literally I can have somebody in the hospital emergency department who's withdrawing. I can see them by telehealth and I can make them feel better in 5 minutes and at least get them to where they can make better decisions. It removes the barrier of NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. We want you to help these people, but we want you to help them over here on this side of town. I remember that lady that I told you about in All Orange. She says, Dr. Loyd, you're going to bring drug addicts into Boones Creek. I said, lady, I don't know what you're looking at. The drug addicts are already in Boones Creek. I mean, I was one and I live here. I don't know what to tell you. Right? And I get people says, I'm going to have a geographical cure. I'm going to move from Nashville to Chicago. Well, guess what? They got drugs in Chicago too. And if it's the other way, you're moving from Chicago to Nashville, they got drugs in Nashville. That's not the problem, guys. It's not the problem, and NIMBY is a huge issue. It allows the provider insight that it's hard to get in a 15-minute visit. What I learned when I was doing telehealth in the pandemic is I got to see the chaos in my patients' lives in their homes. They're sitting there, they got 2 kids that are just going back crap crazy. Right, and I'll tell you a big mistake I made. I had a patient that had a great job at our airport in Nashville, B&A. And he'd done really well, and during the pandemic, he was in his car, his kids were in the back seat, and they were on their computers. And I saw blankets and stuffed animals. His name was Mike. I said, hey, Mike. I said, man, are you living in your car? I was joking. He said, yeah, Dr. Loyd, I am. He lost his job at the airport and been foreclosed on his rent. They said rent protection, that's all crap. If they foreclosed on, they put all kinds of people out. So he lost his home, and he actually had his kid. I would have never known that had I not seen it. And now I'm better able to help him. I love some of the things that telehealth did. Drug screening was still possible. You can still do that using oral swabs and face-to-face on the computer. And so there's ways to get around that. So I told you about these two systems of care. So I'm going to finish my talk with some illustrations of these. Because I told you that when I went into treatment, I went to Vanderbilt University in Nashville. There were 24 kids on my floor. And guys, they were kids. I was 37 years old. Most of them were 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. They were just kids. Nobody knew I was a doctor. And right off the bat, even though I'm shaking, I'm going through withdrawals, I started to open my eyes. Even though I was still dope sick and I was still using until I walked in the door, I saw this all very clearly, and I have never recovered from it. This is actually not her. It's a picture I could find on the computer. It was closest to her because I don't have her permission to use her, but I promise you she looks just like this. I hear people say all the time, oh, if you didn't get better in your addiction treatment, it's your fault. You didn't want it bad enough. You didn't find your bottom. I'm going to show you tough love. I hear all of that stuff. And my experience is that most people saying that have no idea what they're talking about. So there were 24 kids on my floor. Nobody knew I was a doctor. At night, we would sit around, and those kids, if they were leaving the next day or two, they would try to come up with a symptom that would give them one more day. One more. They knew they were going to relapse if they went back to the street. And I never got over it, and I haven't gotten over it to this day. I hope I never get over it, because I knew I was getting ready to get world-class help, and none of them were. This was a little girl that was next to me. She was 19 years old. She was a prostitute in Printer's Alley in Nashville, right off South Broadway where the honky-tonks are. She had whelps up and down her arms. She had hepatitis C and HIV disease. And the night before I left, I gave her my pillow. I had the only normal pillow in the whole ward because my college roommate brought it to me. You know, I used to think that I needed this car and this house and to be okay. What I learned from treatment was I needed a towel, right? A big towel to dry off, and I needed a pillow. If I ever write a book, that's going to be my first chapter. Right? I learned in treatment I didn't need all this other stuff. I needed this basic stuff. I gave my pillow to her. She ran in her room and came back and she said, Steve, here's a picture of me when I'm clean. And she showed me a picture like this at her junior prom in Mount Juliet, which is where I now live. She wanted me to see her like that. I never forgot her. I think about her all the time. And whenever I was putting this talk together and Michelle told me what she wanted me to cover, I knew immediately I wanted to talk about her because I think about her. When I'm out there right now, we've got all of this money floating around. It's about $60 billion nationwide to start to build a system of care to take care of folks who have these issues. And I'm getting really scared that we're going to whiz it away. I'm getting really scared we're going to spend it on things that don't help people. And I think about her. And I think about her being 19, and that was 20 years ago. She'd be 40 if she lives. I don't think she's died. I haven't seen her in our paper. I know her name. But I think about her all the time because she didn't step into the system of care I stepped into. She stepped into a system of care that her moving through the process was not determined by her doctors or her clinicians. It was determined by an insurance company. I stepped into a system of care for doctors and professional athletes and people like that. And my progression through the system was determined by my doctors and the people taking care of me from a therapeutic standpoint. I stepped into a system of care that has a 95% success rate. Doctors who have my issue at 5 years, 95% of them are back in their jobs off of everything. What's that number for the regular population? It's about 8 to 15%. What's the difference in those two populations? People say, oh, well, doctors are smarter. Nope, I'm in that category. They dang sure ain't, okay? It has everything to do with the system of care that they step into. And there's two systems of care. There's a system of care that she stepped into, and then there's a system of care that I stepped into. And my mission in life is to put these two things together. If we will allocate the resources and we'll give people the treatment I get, we'll see success rates be 70, 80, 90%. And if we don't, we'll get the same results we've got that we're getting right now. A few years ago, 2 years ago, I went to an event in Washington, D.C., a group of parents who've lost their kids to overdose. Every fall, go out on the Capitol Mall. That's the mall right behind this lady. You see those tombstones. That way is the Capitol. That way is the Washington Monument. I get up to D.C. for this event. Alexis Prius asked me up to come and see it. I go up there, and they're having a hurricane in D.C. I didn't know D.C. had hurricanes, but they were having a hurricane in D.C. They did not call the event off. I went out there. Rain is coming sideways, and I see parents and grandparents putting these tombstones in the ground, and I can't breathe watching it. And I ran into this lady. She was out there trying to find her grandson. She's from West Virginia. And I helped her find her grandson's little tombstone out there that day. The politicians were having their caucus parties in D.C. that weekend. Do you know how many of them came to that event? Not a damn one. Not one. And I'd see them out at night in their buses and their party gowns. And I got her grandmom out there trying to find her grandson's daggum tombstone on the mall. I started a clinic in Newport, Tennessee. We treated people with methadone. I didn't know the first thing about methadone, and the only reason I opened the clinic is because the judge in the area wanted all 3 forms of medication, and he didn't trust any of the other providers. And I'd been on his drug court for about 5 years. And so I opened up a clinic. Guys, I didn't know anything. I'd do the intake, and I'd say, hang on a second. I go to the bathroom. I go back in my office. I get out my book. I'd start reading and figure out how to treat them and come back in. So when your doctor tells you they got to go to the bathroom, don't believe it. They're Googling. Okay? I got this lady. She's 33 years old, and she had a scar from here to here. Why do 33-year-olds have a scar from here to here? Open heart surgery. She was using drugs intravenously. She had gotten endocarditis, which is a heart valve infection with bacteria and platelets, and every time your heart beats, it sprays bacteria all over your body. That's called sepsis. Has about a 50% mortality rate. They couldn't take care of it by antibiotics, so they cracked her chest open, put a heart valve in her. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks, cost about $500,000. Didn't do anything to treat her underlying addiction. Her diagnosis was infective endocarditis, status post-mitral valve replacement, and I'm telling you that's not her diagnosis, that's what happened to her. Her diagnosis is substance use disorder secondary to opioids, complicated by IV drug abuse, and she had an underlying mental illness that was not being dealt with. She got out of the hospital. How long did it take her to put a needle back in her arm? You all know the answer. In the parking lot. And people are shocked. I'm not shocked at all. We didn't treat the underlying problem. She thought she had to have that or she would die, so she used in the parking lot. We can intervene and help her. She shows up at my clinic, and guys, I've been doing this a while. I know where to look. Women like to shoot under watch bands, rings, groin, breast, genitalia, between their toes. I mean, I've been doing this a while and never thought to look at her dadgum shin. I'd had her for 2 weeks. She says, Dr. Loyd, I have something I want to show you. We go back in her office. She rolls her pant leg up, and I see this. I don't know if there's another doctor in the room. Is there any more doctors in here? Am I the only one? But you all recognize this and say, hey, that probably needs antibiotics, and it probably needs to be in the hospital. I can see bone. Okay? I said, honey, you need to be in the hospital. She said, I was in the hospital. She was in a large academic institution not far from where we were. After she had been there, she's using 6 grams of heroin a day. Your all's mouth dropped when I told you I was using 100 pills a day. She's using 10 times more than me. What happened after she'd been there for 2 days? She got dopesick. The hospital had no idea how to treat her because they're not trained and they don't believe in medication. So she starts pulling at her IVs. How'd the hospital respond to that? Kicked her out. She has an 11-year-old son that she does not have custody of. Does she need custody of her 11-year-old son? No. We have to protect the son. Does she deserve a pathway back to her son? Damn straight, at least in my book. And so she comes in. She's awesome, by the way. You can tell I love her. I do. She says, I said, honey, you need to be on antibiotics. She says, I'm on antibiotics. I said, what are you on? She said, Clinda something. I said, okay, clindamycin. Good choice. Bring it in tomorrow. So I'm expecting a pill bottle, right, from a pharmacy. She comes in the next day and she hands me a blue box. It's this big, and it has fish on the outside of it. And it's clindamycin for guppies. She had Googled skin infection. She Googled antibiotic for skin infection and figured out she could buy clindamycin at the pet food store without having to be shamed in front of a doctor. When I talk about disparities in care, guys, you all sit there and look at this and your mouths drop. I'll guarantee you this is happening in Orlando, Florida today. Guarantee it. I'll guarantee you there's people that are being detoxed off of drugs in jail today with no medical care. And the medical care they're getting is by their cellmate. Guarantee it. This is a system of care that people step into, and it's unacceptable. Thank God for the $4 Walmart list. It's wonderful. We treated her for about 12 weeks. It scarred, but it did clear up, and she got her second day of supervised visitation with her child. Does she need her child back yet? No. She got the social, but she's moving, right? This is my friend Brooke. I love treating pregnant women. It is the most fun that I have in my life. My women are tough. My women are resilient. I'll put them up against anybody. If I had to get recovery like they did, I'd have failed. The strongest people I've ever met in my life, this is the toughest one, and I've treated thousands. Her name is Brooke. This picture was taken 7 hours before I met her. She's 8 weeks pregnant. She's using IV heroin, IV fentanyl, and one other drug. What other drug is she using? Meth. Right, you see the scars, right? The pick marks. Meth is made out of stuff you get at Home Depot and Lowe's. It gets deposited on your skin. You pick at it, and that's what you see here. She goes to her mom. It's her first child. She wants help. They Google doctors who will take women who are pregnant and drug addicted. My name pops up. My number pops up. They call me. I said, bring her. Brooke is a certified welder. I mean, she's 25 years old and a certified welder. That's how tough she is. I knew her for 2 weeks before she called me anything other than MF'er. Okay. Good thing about pregnant women is you can scare the hell out of insurance companies with them. And I did, and Brooke got so much better. She's 38 weeks pregnant in this picture. It's a bittersweet picture because she turned 26 this day. We're giving her help with her underlying behavioral health issues, which are PTSD and bipolar disorder. She's on 8 milligrams of buprenorphine. We've got her in a sober living facility, and she's getting help with her trauma. And guys, her trauma, my Sunday school class don't want to know about, okay? And Brooke is doing great, but she turned 26. What happens when you turn 26? Lose your parents' insurance, so she's going to go back on her state's Medicaid, and she wants to go back to her home state. What's in her home state? Guys, something called a baby daddy. I had no idea in hell what a baby daddy was, none. And you know how when you don't ask somebody and you go a period of time, now you can't ask? That was me, all right? I looked it up in Urban Dictionary finally and figured out what it was. And I hate that call. That's the call I hate. Hey, Dr. Loyd, my old man just got out. I hate that one. And I can't stop it. And she's got Medicaid, and she's going to go back to her home state, and she doesn't have me in her home state. I love Brooke. Brooke became my friend. I know there's probably some boundary issues there. I don't care. She's my friend also. And I take Medicaid. Her doctor back home doesn't take Medicaid. If you're uninsured, I take that too because I got grant money to help you. She's going to have to pay a doctor $125 a week cash out of her money, and she can't get a job as a certified welder because she's a felon, because she got intent for resale, and she's not a dope dealer. Her tolerance was so high on the fentanyl, the amount that they got her with was enough to tip the scale, and she had a public defender, and I'm not knocking the public defenders. However, if that was my daughter in the first-time drug offense, everybody in the room knows she wouldn't have a sticky note on her permanent record. It's just a fact. The system is not balanced. And so there Brooke is, and she's given all of her money simply to this person that's not helping her with any of her underlying behavioral health issues. I love this picture of her. She sent it to me from the delivery suite. That's her and her mom. That end picture to that first picture is 32 weeks. Brooke is a dime. Y'all know what a dime is? It's a damn 10. Brooke is a 10. And whenever she had the care that she needed, that's where she got to. And when she stepped into that system where she didn't have that, she struggled. She got arrested. She relapsed. They put her in jail, and somebody with no medical license, no medical training, and likely a high school education took her off of all her medications, said she didn't need them. They kept her for about 33 days, and when she got out, they did not give her a referral to anybody like me. And on the morning of December 13th, 2020, my phone rang early in the morning, and it was her mom, Angie, who was in that picture with her. And she said, Steve, I found Brooke cold and blue in her bed this morning. Brooke died of an acute overdose of heroin and fentanyl. She's one of the 107,622. She stepped into a system of care that killed her. It killed her. I stepped into a system of care that put me in front of you guys this morning. Okay? You say, all right, we can kill our way out of this. We'll just let these people die. There's a huge problem with that. Who's that on the right? That's Miss Ava. Ava is 2 years old. She's potty training. She appears to be pleased with whatever's happened in that toilet. All right? So let's subject Ava to my slot machine real quick. What's her first 7? Double whammy. Mom and dad both with addiction. First 7's on the pay line. Second 7, trauma. She's 2 and her ACEs score is already a 2. Mom dead, dad in prison. That's an ACEs score of 2. If we don't do something to intervene here, what are the chances that Ava's in our system in a decade? It's about 100%, guys, close to it. Luckily, she's got Angie. Grandmom, I'm working in the state of West Virginia. 40% of the kids in West Virginia are raised by somebody other than their parent. I can't even get that number in my head. We have a problem, guys. We have a problem. You can pick addiction out of that first picture. Can you pick it out of this one? I told you I'm a huge University of Tennessee fan. That's my little family back in the day. We're headed to Knoxville to a ball game on a Saturday afternoon. I'm fresh out of residency. I got a future that's unbelievably bright. I've got a medical license. I've got a great job. I make more money in a year than my mom and dad made in 10 years combined. And I love that picture. That's my son, Heath. Heath was born in 1994. The quarterback at the University of Tennessee in 1994 was Heath Schuler. So I named my son after him. Felt like it was the right thing to do. My daughter, Haley, in that picture, Haley was born in 1997. Does anybody know the quarterback at Tennessee in 97? It's easy for any football fans. It's Peyton Manning. So I having a little girl, Peyton would be a really cool girl's name. So I said, Karen, let's name her Peyton. We would have Heath and Peyton, back-to-back quarterbacks, right? And she said it would make us trash, and she wouldn't let me do it. So I have Haley instead of Peyton. So we're headed to the ball game in Knoxville, and I love that picture, except for you look in my right pocket, there's a bulge. It's not my car keys, it's not my wallet. It's a bottle of pills. So every time I look at that picture, I know the deal. You can pick it out of Brooke being in the front seat of that car. Can you pick it out of this? It's the same disease, guys, same underlying drivers. I stepped into a system of care that put me where I am today. A few years ago, I got this in the mail. It's a registered letter. Nothing ever good comes in a registered letter, ever. This one was. Bill Lee, the governor of Tennessee, appointed me to the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners. I'm now the president. And everybody, yeah. You can do that, but you're also laughing underneath saying, hey, Steve should be in front of the Tennessee Medical Board, not on it. And you're right. You're exactly right. But I stepped into a system of care that was designed for me to get better. And most of the people that we know and that we deal with step into a fragmented system of care that just tries to move them through the system. If you want to be scared of something and you got kids, and this has nothing to do with my talk otherwise, I always want to warn my families of it. This is what you're scared of, okay? It looks like a Percocet, 10 milligrams of Percocet. Percocet is oxycodone. Oxycodone is 1.5 morphine equivalent. That means that 10 milligrams of Percocet is 15 milligrams of morphine in strength. This is carfentanil. It's not Percocet. Carfentanil is 10,000 morphine equivalents. Long and short of it, you take this pill right here and you die. And it looks just like what comes out of the pharmacy. I'm a child of the 80s. Everything about the 80s is superior to today. I'm sorry, it is. And particularly our music. And one of my music, by far our music, one of my musical heroes, Prince. When I walk out here today and you see me with my earbuds on, I will guarantee you Prince will be in my ears today. Guarantee it. This is what killed Prince. Prince had an oxycodone addiction. He got Dopesick. He sent his boys to the street to grab some Percocet. They grabbed some Percocet that looked just like this. Prince took it and died of an overdose, and in his autopsy report was no oxycodone. It was carfentanil. You buy this stuff off the street today, guys, and it looks just like what comes out of the pharmacy, only it's fentanyl. It is not oxycodone. If you're buying stimulants, cocaine, methamphetamine, anything off the street, you are going to get fentanyl today, and fentanyl will kill you. I'll guarantee it. And we have to get in our schools. We've had kids that use the marijuana vapes, and the vapes have been infiltrated with fentanyl, and we've had overdoses in our schools from marijuana vapes that were adulterated with fentanyl. Bad as I don't like marijuana, it don't kill you. Okay, marijuana that has fentanyl in it will for sure kill you. I'm going to skip that one. We'll talk about it in the next one. And I'll finish with this. Because, guys, this is the whole reason I came here today, and it's the whole reason that I think it's so important. And when Michelle and Linda call me and want me to do stuff for you, and I always do, I love it. Because this is what it's about. This is what we're trying to build. This is my little family. We are in Florence, Italy. I never, as a little boy growing up in Jonesboro, Tennessee, dreamed I'd go to Florence, Italy. And I've got to go a couple of times now, and I've loved it, and I hope I get to go back. That's my son, Heath, my daughter-in-law, Laura. The blonde is my wife, Karen. That's me in the middle. I want to talk about the girl to my right there. That's my daughter, Haley. I'm a firm believer in the old double standard, guys. I love Heath. I do. He is my best friend and I love him. But when it was time for him to go to college, his ass needed to go. Okay? It was time. Haley, completely different story. She was in high school when he was in college, and we were watching TV one night, and I said, Haley, if you'll live in your bedroom for the rest of your life and live in this house, I'll pay for everything. Haley didn't listen to me, and she brought that thing on her ride home one day. His name is Sterling. And they were going to the junior-senior prom. He was a senior, she was a junior. First of all, he drove up in my driveway in a car. There was no way I was letting my daughter get in. And so I gave him my car. I just met him. I said, son, take my car. Just keep my daughter safe, please, or I'll kill you. And so after I talked to him for about 5 minutes, I went in and told Karen, I said, Karen, I think I just met our son-in-law. She said, come on, Steve, it's their first date. And sure enough, 6 years later, I'm standing at the end of a long aisle in Charleston, South Carolina. Let me break for a second and say something to dads in the room. Dads in the room with little girls. Don't worry about college. College is easy. You can pull that out of the front pocket. Wedding, you better start saving for that now. They've been married 8 years, and they only told me how much it cost 2 years ago. They kept it from me for 6 years. So we're getting ready to walk down the aisle. Haley's on my right arm, and I'm a mess because I'm all feeling, guys. I love it. I am all feeling. And she laid her head over on my shoulder, and I'm crying ugly, as you can see. And she said, Daddy, you're the first man I ever loved. Thank you for everything you ever did for me. Yeah. That's not a bad moment, right? And the kids have no idea. The kids have never seen my talks. And what nobody else knows except for me is, and in that moment, I was present enough to know this. And that was a great moment. I was not in our program that night in parentheses. I'm Stephen Loyd, May 11th, 1967 until today. I didn't die in 2004. Somebody else didn't walk my daughter down the aisle, I did, right? That's why this is important. That's why the system of care is important, because this is what we're after, okay? Now, the dads in the room that are looking forward to that moment now, let me throw a little water on that. When they get in the car later on that night and go to a hotel, that sucks. It still sucks. They've been married 8 years. They come to stay all night with me and Karen. I want them sleeping in different beds, and they ain't done it a single time, okay? Heath got married during the pandemic. We were all living together, and it brought back the family dinner table. And we kept it because we loved it. We hadn't had it because we always ate watching TV. He came and sat down at the dinner table, and he said, hey, Pops, he said, would you be the best man at my wedding? He played college baseball. He's got 100 buddies. And I'm going to tell you this. I was not the perfect parent. I got recovery when my kids were 9 and 6. I didn't miss anything. I was present, right? I made my mistakes. I was on an academic track earlier in my career. I wanted to be dean of the med school. And when I left and got into addiction medicine, because I think I was built for this. I think it's why I'm on the earth. Okay, I do. And I had one of my mentors at East Tennessee State said, Steve, you would have been further along in your academic career if you hadn't coached as many baseball games. I wanted to give him the finger. I don't regret coaching a single one of them, not a one. I was present. Boys don't ask their daddies to be their best men who were not present in their lives. And I was present, and I was present because of the gift of recovery in the system of care that I stepped into. This is what people want, guys. And this used to be the slide that I closed with. Heath has moved way up on my totem pole list, and I bet everybody in the room knows why. So September of 2023, September 15th of 2023, Heath and Laura gave me my first granddaughter, Cece. She is now almost 14 months old. I will fly home tonight. I will make a beeline for Cece's house. She lives a couple of neighborhoods over, and by the time she takes her bath tonight, I will be there. I get to be a granddad, and it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And it would not have happened had somebody not stepped into my life and helped me 20 years ago. And it's why I come here. You know, this is an organization of families. And from a legislative standpoint and where we're putting our investment of dollars, to me, this is where it's got to be, because this is where all of this happens. And we have to take a look at it. We have to look at how these things affect the family unit as a whole and the resources that we need to help our families get where they need to be. Because the playing field is not level, and it never has been level. I used to be to the right of Leonid Brezhnev. And some in the room, people don't even know who Brezhnev was. He was the ruler of Russia. Okay, I was to the right of him. I thought that everybody had an equal chance. The people who were in jail deserved to be there. All those things, until I opened my eyes and started looking at reality, and most of that is not true at all. And the system is skewed, and the criminal justice system is skewed in the point to keep people in it, not out of it. Because if you're going to have jobs in the criminal justice system, you better have people to lock up. And they don't get better locking them up. They get better when we help them and treat them. And that's why I try to keep my focus, because when I get out there and I want to fight, I don't do as well. When I keep my focus on things like this, I think we can start to attract people. So with that said, I finished a few minutes early so the person in the back raising the sign up doesn't pick me off with a high-powered rifle. And I know a lot of you are leaving, and I don't take it personally, but I will set aside time. We'll do a breakout session and have questions and answers. Thank all of y'all.